Have you ever been cut off in traffic or honked at when you did nothing wrong? Did that tick you off? I think most drivers at some point in their lives have experienced a case of road rage, even if it was very minor. But I'm sure that the majority don't ever act on it. Netflix's new series Beef shows us what happens when two people can't let that rage go, and that sometimes leads to very bad things. After a road rage incident between two strangers, Danny Cho, a failing contractor with a chip on his shoulder, goes head to head with Amy Lau, a self made entrepreneur with a picturesque life. The increasing stakes of their feud begin to unravel their lives and relationships, but will they ever learn the error of their ways? This stars Wong and Yeun, and with 10 episodes that are in the neighborhood of 35-ish minutes, this can be an emotionally exhausting and raw binge session. As I said in the synopsis, there's a minor incident where two people who are kind of on edge already have a honking altercation that leads to a high-speed chase through neighborhoods, leaving both feeling even angrier than when they started and exhilarated at the same time. Now, the general tone of the show is very angry, but there are also elements of sweetness, sympathy, honesty, and almost forgiveness. But there's also a very darkly comedic angle to the show as well. Both Danny and Amy are flawed and they're hurting people. They also feel a lot of pressure from their families, even if it's not being directed at them. And these individual arcs that branch off to highlight each of the main characters' struggles and fears, they become very engaging and really complex, which then build out an amazingly engaging storyline. Now, Danny's depressed and seemingly a sort of failure at his endeavors. His contracting business is barely a business, and because of his overall demeanor, he typically turns off clients. Plus, his desperation shows through, making him appear less confident and therefore not a good sound investment. He's got a very strained relationship and dynamic with his younger brother Paul, who's played by young Mazzino. Now, in one sense, there's a protective element to Danny's overbearingness, but mostly, they just share a very dysfunctional dynamic. When Danny makes Paul give him all his passwords to his phone, this creates a divide between the two, making Danny an oppressive presence who condescends just constantly to Paul. And because Danny's got this chip on his shoulder for just about everything, he's miserable in just about every aspect. But something that the show does that subverts that characteristic is when Danny stops focusing on revenge or even stops obsessing over his schemes, he has these brief moments of joy and charisma where he's enjoyable as a character rather than somebody that we kind of loathe. And at one point, Danny plays a guitar and sings. I had no idea that Yeun had such an amazing voice. His singing is crisp with just this pureness to it that was really an awesome surprise. And once I heard him sing, I wanted it to happen just so much more, but it was only showcased a couple of times in the series. Now, many times through this, Yeun bears his soul and gives us a very raw and visceral performance. It's heartbreaking to watch at times, especially as we see his life just go from bad to worse. And most of those come about because of decisions that he's made previously. But there also comes a point where you just want to see a dude catch a break. And Yeun is able to showcase both despair and joy in convincing ways, and that made him such a compelling character to watch. Now, Wong as Amy is also extremely flawed, especially as she moves through life resenting the life that she's living. Amy's got a thriving business, and we get to see the tiring toll that takes on her as she sacrifices basically all her time to keep making it a success. Now, Amy's not a likable character, just as Danny isn't. She's brash and privileged, and also a bit arrogant. The funny thing, though, is that when she looks down her nose at others, especially like the likes of Danny and his peers, she's also in the exact same boat with a potential buyer of her company. There's always somebody bigger and better and richer, but Amy somehow misses a lot of that. Now, Wong also gives us a raw and exposed performance. We get to watch her life unravel, and the way she claws and scrapes to try and cling to what she has, it's tough to watch, but it's also satisfyingly captivating. She commands the screen, and love or hate her, she's a dominating presence that's hard to look away from. Now, I'd mentioned that family plays an important role in this story, and really every arc is influenced in one way or another by family. Now, sometimes the focus is on Danny and his messed up relationships, and other times we get to see how Amy is also struggling because of the dysfunction that's present in her life. Now, neither of them are blameless, and most of the situations do come about because of their own actions. Good gravy, the tension and the angst that's created is so fun to watch. There are a bunch of other characters in this that also help to solidify storylines, and each of them create fascinating personas. One that was my favorite through the show was David Cho, who plays Danny's cousin Isaac. Now, the dude's not a nice guy or a good guy, but there's a certain presence that he has that really drew me into the character. He fits well in the narrative, and he provides some good complexities and complications as the series goes along. Now, as much as this is a dark comedy, there are also some rather dramatic moments that help to influence the story. And sometimes these do feel a little abrupt, but in the end, they do end up complementing the overall arc. Now, there's an event that happens in the penultimate episode, and first off, that episode is intense, but it's also a tiny bit absurd. There's some gunfire sounds that we hear, and it feels like the amount that's present in the audio moves from slightly believable to outright ridiculous. Now, I'm willing to overlook it in the grander scheme, but the longer this scene played out, the more unbelievable it became. And the drama doesn't have to be intense or action-filled to be memorable. There's a scene where Amy has gone to Vegas and she has this long conversation and interaction with another character. The tenderness and the freedom that are showcased is very moving. And then the show uses this quieter moment to then set up an exciting scenario. Now, the final episode may be the most powerful, but also the funniest. And it's also, though, the most different in tone and feel. Now, this is the culmination of everything, and the dialogue that's shared allows us to finally see some growth in the characters. For 9.5 episodes, we've endured some obnoxious, entitled, sometimes disgusting individuals, barely ever showcasing that they're learning anything from their experiences. But when they do, and the story reaches its conclusion, I found the resolution to be very satisfying and even touching. Now, there are some tender moments that are punctuated by comedy that I think work when they're mixed, allowing us to see the characters finally catch a clue. And not only is this final episode different in tone, but also the camera effects are very different as well. I mean, this isn't a bad thing because what we're shown works in tandem with the scenario, but I definitely noticed the shift in that last episode. Now, I'm glad that despite the dour nature of the overall storyline, when all was said and done, I didn't leave the show feeling depressed or even angry. Now, I wasn't jumping for joy or overly happy, but I figured, given the story content and the character arcs, that this would end up making me feel like I needed to take a shower. And that didn't happen. The show as a whole is very engrossing, and it held my attention. But I do think in small portions here and there, I felt a bit of the time. 10 episodes is a lot for the story, and we witness a bunch of insanity along the way. But even though some moments made me feel the slowness of a scene, I really can't think of any sequences that should be cut. So overall, Beef is a very dark look at human nature and what happens when two unhappy people collide in the midst of their misery. Ali Wong and Steven Yeun create riveting performances, each nuanced in their flaws and grotesque imperfections, and yet somehow still maintain some humanity. The series is a long one to binge, but audiences are rewarded with a moving and biting story filled with comedic discomfort that ultimately results in satisfying character growth. The supporting cast is phenomenal, and they work to create complex character arcs to support the captivating leads. There's sex, some nudity, a ton of profanity, and then some brutal violence. I give Beef 4.5 out of 5 couches. So are there any dark comedies that you enjoy? I think I remember liking that movie Very Bad Things when it came out, but I haven't seen it in a long time, and I don't know if I'd like it now. But I would love to hear yours in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.